Thank you both for joining us today. Let's start off with a bit of background for those of us who aren't familiar with it, because Shaun, you're kind of here in a dual capacity here. So that is your current job title, but you're here to talk about sort of a previous incarnation, as it were.
Or even the next one. Thank you. So currently I'm employed by both Chelsea and Westminster and the Royal Marsden, and what they've brought together is a new way of working for the Foundation Trust to share their IT infrastructure and support management. So what they've done is put together a private company, the staff from the two trusts joining that. We're in a period of growth at the moment, and we will take all of those support services into one organisation and then offer that service to further NHS Foundation Trusts within the M25. So the last year has been about creating the programme office and the means to do this and effectively set up a business from scratch. And part of that has been about how to get all of these parties to collaborate.
Right. And the business is called Sphere, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So it's systems powering healthcare.
Okay. And James, Huddle, tell us a bit about Huddle.
Yeah, sure. So hi there, everyone. Huddle effectively is kind of a cloud collaboration platform. So for those of you that have ever used SharePoint or anything similar, we're a UK company, but cloud-focused around kind of content collaboration. So we use very heavily in public sector and private sector to kind of help people facilitate, collaborate on documents, policies, etc. So we've been around since about 2006. The product was released 2007. One of the first companies to get pan-government accreditation. So we're one of the G-Cloud success stories, I think it's fair to say. So it's great to be here.
Okay, so Shaun, you kind of alluded to the question I'm about to ask, which is the driver for using technology like cloud collaboration technology like Huddles. Can you talk us through in a bit more detail what that is? So it's collaborating individuals internally, externally, both?
Bit both initially. So the vision, which originally stemmed out of some work between the Royal Brompton, Royal Marsden and Chelsea, was about how by working together we can achieve more efficiently and at less cost. When I was brought in to head up the programme, very quickly there was a need for me to be able to communicate with IT directors in a couple of trusts, a private business partner who aren't on N3, our solicitors, we have a project office, we have many technical work streams, finance and procurement. So I needed a platform that wasn't beholden or owned by one partner. And given that the ethos is entirely cloud first, I wanted something that we could use online. Fortunately, Huddle is one that I've engaged previously in an NHS environment as a G-Cloud, now digital marketplace procurement, and it's quite possibly the most simple business case and due diligence I've had to do. So one of the questions that we took was we know that information governance, as Mike was saying previously, they will fret over this, so we actively sought them out for both organisations before we started. And with help from James's team, said, look, here is Huddle's security paper, here's the accreditation, we know where the data's set, we can manage all of the security, but it doesn't matter that the people that we're talking with work for half a dozen different organisations and are disparately located. We didn't have an office for the first 6 months.
So you refer there to the information governance people, and yes, Mike talked about that earlier on. One of the things that you guys had as a big selling point, and still have as a big selling point, is your security accreditation. Can you talk us through that? Because that whole kind of the way we do security in the digital marketplace is sort of changing now, isn't it, in terms of accreditation and what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. So, I mean, more looking back, maybe 6 months or so, Huddle security accreditation was fairly straightforward. We had the ISO 27001 as a base, which is, recognized globally. It's a very simple kind of tick box for us to meet. On top of that, we got the pan-government accreditation, so we were the first cloud collaboration company to get that pan-government accreditation, specifically to IL2. This movement now away from decentralizing that and putting the emphasis more on the CSIRO kind of does roll it back more to individual organizations actually having to do that risk assessment. However, I guess because we've got the RMADs, we've got the documentation, we've got the credibility that we've already had from the pan-government accreditation days, there's still a fair bit of work, but the work comes on us more than it does. So it is more of a vendor issue, which I guess isn't as big a concern for you guys. I think this movement towards understanding what cloud platforms can provide to people often does come down to the security, the IT governance guys. They're not the ones who say yes, but they're invariably the ones who say no. So taking that proactive stance has been very important, and Huddle's always tried to engage as early as possible. I think it's quite easy to slip under the radar, and that's never a good idea.
Okay. So, Shaun, you used the phrase cloud first when you were talking there. That's cloud first in terms of sphere, in terms of the trusts you're working with?
Yeah, definitely. So the business model, everything that we will look at, I mean, the Huddle engagement thus far was just about setting up the business and how the program office could manage. Having built the infrastructure for the company, most of it is based in Liverpool in a secured, hardened data centre, which is replicated in Docklands. That partner has Tier 1 connections, N3 connections, and that's where we host our infrastructure, but where we will also look to migrate our partners to. So at the moment, the two partners that are on board already each have data centres. This tends to be real estate, which is not cheap. It's kit that you need to manage locally. It has a certain amount of overhead for the technology, the people to run it, the heat, the cooling, and the security. And again, one of Mike's points was about if you brought the auditors in tomorrow to do 27001, how many of us could hand on heart say that all of our data centres would meet that? And I know that for both of the partners that I'm working with, that's not something that we'd be comfortable with this week or this month. So by using a partner agreement, which again was digital marketplace procurement, the first box that's ticked is the security. It's enabled. For the first tranche of services, I had to work up the whole life cost model and the TCO of that implementation. And if you take out all of the staff involved with physically managing a data centre and the electrics and the cooling and all the rest of it, our investment costs were still half of what they would be if I went out and provisioned this in one of the existing facilities.
As you sort of roll your services out to other parts of the NHS, to other trusts going forward, obviously there's a hell of a lot of legacy infrastructure out there. How big an issue is integration of new cloud stuff, the cloud layer, as it were, with the legacy stuff that's out there?
Yeah, so at the moment we're taking a view to assess all of those business services and look for the low-hanging fruit. So we will start with the things which cause people in hospitals less trauma and enable the business to work more efficiently. We're looking at single pane of glass platforms is what my technical architect loves to say about how we manage everything, so that we're able to look at the legacy infrastructure and those hosts that are running it, whether physically or virtually, but on their own terra firma, together with those that are presented within the cloud.
Okay. James, going back to Huddle and your public sector experience, we were talking earlier on about while there has been more activity in the healthcare sector in the UK in terms of cloud over the last couple of years than there has been before, there is still perhaps an inherent conservatism with a small c, which is perhaps down to something we'll be discussing this afternoon. It's people, it's people's data, it's something very, very personal to us, and the old security alarms still start ringing. What's your experience been in terms of the maturity of the healthcare market, in terms of its understanding of cloud computing?
Sure. So I think from a generic perspective, obviously, people understand cloud, what it brings, the benefits. This movement of whether it's commoditized IT services, stuff like email, other bits and pieces, once you start moving into areas like collaboration, working on documents, people's data, their stuff, there is that natural human reticence to actually give it to someone else. Once you start then talking about medical records, PPI, all of that, there have been, there is still a huge amount of concern around how that's managed. The way Huddle talks about it is, again, to Shaun's point, around things like the data centers, how we do the security. This stuff is non-trivial. We've invested huge amounts of money getting to that point. However, the technology is the easy bit. We can implement the technology. We can get the kind of certs on top of that. Again, over in our US data centers, we're looking at HIPAA and those nice ticks, which we can't necessarily move to the UK market. It is a cultural thing. It will be a maturity movement, but cloud-first strategies are helping quite considerably.
I do recall, obviously we're running up to the general election in May, but prior to the last election, David Cameron was talking about the National Programme for IT, May at Rottenell, and he was saying, why are we doing this? We could go to somebody like Google, we could go to somebody like Microsoft, and we could do this, and all hell broke loose in Daily Mail land as a result of it, the thought that you were handing your healthcare records across to Google. That's a cultural issue that goes way beyond the NHS. It goes right out into the national psyche, doesn't it? Does the NHS, in some respects, not help us here because it's such a national institution in the UK, and it's something completely different to perhaps the American healthcare market, that there's the perception that it's something more precious and more valuable?
Potentially. I think one of the biggest issues that we have with things like the Googles and the Microsofts is that data affinity, and also the legal ramifications of the laws that they sit under and all of that, the Patriots Act, the Communications Act, etc. One of the things that because we're a UK company, UK data centers, we're bound by EU law, we're bound by UK law. So servicing something like the NHS is, I won't say an easier proposition, all things are relative, right? So it would be a massive benefit, I think, if the NHS took a broad approach to moving towards cloud. I am somewhat of a pragmatist, though, so I know it's going to be baby steps. I know there's going to be areas like email first, moving those kind of services, and then slowly stepping up, sharing content, then to the PPI, then to the medical records, then to servicing the medical professionals more broadly.
So, Shaun, you talked about the procurement being one of the easiest you've done. You used the cloud store as it was then, I guess, digital marketplace now. We're going to be hearing from Tony Singleton in a short while, and one of the things that we always talk about when we have Tony on these things is what could be done to improve. What's been the good thing about cloud store or digital marketplace? What would you like to see happen to make it even better, even easier?
In terms of ease of use, it was at the time we made this procurement, because it's on a previous version, it was a simple pick list from the number of service contracts that were available. When you look at the store now and the amount of offerings that are on there, it's somewhat more cumbersome. The search engine needs to step up, and the ability to filter is not as friendly as it could be. So we procured under G4, G5 contract came out after this order was placed, and a number of others. I wanted to run the same searches just to see what the new offerings were under G5. And you get into numbers that you can't work with. So you can filter if you can get down to 10 or 20 offerings, but when your shortlist is 127, it becomes a little bit cumbersome.
It's a fairly lengthy shortlist, yeah. Do we have any questions from the floor for either of our panellists?
Shaun, you'll be relieved it's not for you, it's for James. We've been looking at in Monitor, and we've spoken to the Department of Health about collaborative tools. And one of the issues which we had about hosting services is how do we manage it? It's not a security issue, it's the other side of it, it's about the availability. How do we, if we get an FOI request, know what's out there and pull it back from us? Because certainly when I I passed that to the Department of Health's head and asked them about their solution and gave that. He said, "Oh, I thought about that." Was basically the answer. So, if we use Huddle and everyone's using collaboration there, and I get an FOI request, normally I'll just go in SharePoint, for instance, which is our in-house platform. I'll just do a search on it. How would I do that for you? And how do we get around those issues? Especially if people start doing their own little independent huddles.
Sure. So, I mean, from a technical standpoint, really, Huddle's broken down into workspaces. So, and that those are your collections of documents, and that's how you work with different people. But there's an administration layer at the top, so and that does allow people with that kind of omnipotent access to do things like those FOI requests. So there's a typical delegation of administration. Like what you need to be able to do is enable users to get on with their day-to-day lives. But whether it's IT, whether it's governance, to be able to look from the top down, to be able to do things like apply security policies, fulfill FOI requests, etc. So it's something that came up quite a lot, and from the early days, it's something we've been able to manage.
Okay, any more?
Again, I'm sorry, another question for you, because I think it's a really interesting example of a cloud implementation, which is perhaps at the least or lesser controversial end of the spectrum in terms of where cloud fits in the NHS. And the essence of my question is rather similar to the one I asked earlier, in the sense that, so I'm going to give you as an example myself. I work in a university and I have collaborations with multiple groups, so in this country and across the world, and there is more than one Huddle out there. So for an organisation that needs to maintain multiple collaborations with organisations which might have different opinions as to the technology they might be using, it becomes quite complicated when you've got dozens of these different technologies you have to interact with depending on which group you're working with at that point in time. Is there anything in the industry sector which is about trying to reconcile these independent clouds so that clouds can talk to clouds?
I guess there's going to be a natural kind of evolution, survival of the fittest, etc. So where, this saturation of the market, you're right. I mean, the market is so heavily saturated in this area. So you do tend to find that there are niche players in various bits and pieces. In terms of actually consolidating or allowing for that interoperability, we are starting to see movement in that area so that people can share documents. Huddle, for example, we do have a whole set of open APIs. We do work with other partners to enable that information to flow back and forth. It's not. The problem is when you get walled gardens where you're putting information in and you just can't get it out to anything else. So it's slow. Just because the market's moving so quickly and it's growing so rapidly, actually, the concept of interoperability with your competitors, which is effectively what these are, has been, further down the list. However, you're starting to see consolidation, particularly in niche markets, whether it's, something like UK public sector, which of course Huddle is a leader in. We're starting to see people wanting to integrate with us. I think if you asked me this question in maybe 2 years' time, it'd be a very different answer.
Any more?
It's a question for James. So you mentioned at the start the CESG pan-government accreditation to IL2. Did you consider IL3? And if so,
Sure.
How did you satisfy yourself that IL2 was good enough?
Yes, so on that front, I mean, Huddle does actually have an IL3 version, but it's a joint venture with Foreign Commonwealth Office Services, so FCOS, hosted on the Government Secure Application Environment in Milton Keynes. So we got departmental IL3 done by FCO for that, so we kind of had that base covered. The pan-government accreditation was a massive investment for us. It was a huge amount of work. So doing it to IL2 gave us it allowed us to do it on our public platform. So, the main instance of Huddle that 95% of our customers sit on is that IL2 platform. So it gave us the broadest reach for that investment. And also the largest, we are a cloud company. One of the biggest issues with IL3 was it had to sit on GSI, PSN, N3, DII, etc. So that was why we went down that route for the IL2 environment specifically on the PGA front.
Any more? Okay, well, perhaps I can wind up just by asking Shaun then. If we look a year down the track, where do you see Sphere being at that point? What's sort of the next steps for you guys?
Next steps, we currently have For March, a client base of 7,000, a couple of organisations. We expect that to be 9,000 by the summer. We expect to be engaging with the next partner before the end of this year. We will be looking, as I said, the point with the low-hanging fruit is taking all those ancillary services that support the hospitals, so their corporate document storage, their finances, their program office, their payrolls if they still have them, and helping them come away from those data centres, give back some of that real estate, let it be used for something more directly applicable to the patients, save space on the sites, and then we'll be moving towards the big procurements, the integration of electronic patient records and where the trusts want to go, and how we can help use that data more intelligently.
Okay, lots to do. All right, well, thank you very much indeed to James and Shaun. Thank you.